Yat E, Shio. Hello, and welcome to the first presentation of our Indigenous Speaker Series. The Indigenous Education Institute, IEI, along with the National Parks and Bureau of Land Management, is proud and honored to present a sense of place, Indigenous perspectives of land and sky. Our first speaker of the series is Dr. Leroy Littlebear from Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada, who will be speaking today. My name is Nancy Maryboy, and I am the founding president of the Indigenous Education Institute. We are a nonprofit institution with an all-Indigenous board and staff that has been in existence for 25 years. We are located in the San Juan Islands, Washington, and on the Navajo Nation. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and apply traditional Indigenous ways of knowing to contemporary life, with a focus on Native education, environmental change, and sustainable, healthy environments on earth, water, and skies. Much of our work concerns the creation of collaborations with integrity between Western science and traditional Indigenous ways of knowing. I would like to begin our series today with a heartfelt acknowledgement of the Indigenous peoples of the world. Usually, we acknowledge the land on which we are living or presenting. But in this day and age of virtual online realities, we are honoring Indigenous people around the world. The presentations in this series have been shown to reflect an awareness of the foundations of traditional thinking. In Native ways, everything is interconnected. So rather than a specific focus on biology, astronomy, or other separate disciplines, we will be presenting worlds of interrelationships and processes of reciprocity. I want to personally thank each of you for attending this webinar. The interest you have shown is overwhelming. We have over 900, almost 1,000 people registered from all across the United States, from South America, and from South Africa. It's my pleasure now to turn the mic over to my colleague, Marcia Deschardonnay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Deschardonnay, the manager of San Juan Islands National Monument. I want to thank the Indigenous Education Institute and the National Park Service for partnering with the BLM in this effort. Several years ago, Dr. Maryboy invited my participation in a collaboration with integrity discussion with her colleagues at her conference focused on Indigenous science education. It was such a gift to listen to these scholars. I knew that I had understanding that I hadn't known before. It was obvious that this new awareness could have a meaningful benefit to the land management work that the BLM undertakes in cooperation with tribes. Locally, we have the privilege of working with 12 Coast Salish tribes, and in fact, the San Juan Islands National Monument was designated in part for the protection, conservation, and restoration of Coast Salish resources and cultural properties. But the Bureau of Land Management works nationwide with these relationships. In Washington State alone, there are 29 federally registered, recognized tribes. So here we are with a profound responsibility and one means to support collaboration with integrity through greater understanding of our partners. This presentation by Dr. Littlebear is intended to be the foundation for the balance of this year's speakers. As we have had greater interest than anticipated, we tapped into Dr. Littlebear's experience on this topic. Following his presentation, he will first respond to several questions that commonly follow this theme and also are tailored to today's audience. Then he will answer several of the questions. If you forward questions to us today, they won't be answered here, but will be received and shared with the intended recipient. You will also see all of our emails at the end of the webinar and are welcome to reach out to us individually, including Dr. Larry Littlebear. This and all of the sense of place, Indigenous perspectives of land and sky presentations are recorded and can be accessed at the Indigenous Education Institute website shortly following the events. As you have registered by email, We will also share notices to you for upcoming presentations. Nancy, I think we're all ready.
Thank you. It's my greatest pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Leroy Littlebear. Leroy is from the Blackfoot Confederacy in Alberta, Canada. To many of us, Leroy will need no introduction, as he has been a friend, a brother, a mentor, and a guide for many, many years. But to those of you who have not known him personally, you are in for a real treat today. Dr. Leroy Littlebear is a member of the Kainai Nation of the Blackfoot Confederacy near Lethbridge, Alberta. He is Professor Emeritus at the University of Lethbridge. He was the first director of the Native American program at Harvard. He is a lawyer and has been the recipient of numerous awards. He was awarded the prestigious National Aboriginal Achievement Award for Education in 2003, the highest award bestowed by Canada's First Nations community. He received an honorary Doctor of Laws from the University of Northern British Columbia in 2016 for his advocacy of Indigenous rights and self-governance, and for his work to promote access to education for Indigenous people globally. He's known for his work with the physicist David Bohm and his creation of the important dialogues between Western scientists and Indigenous knowledge holders. His legal advice is widely sought on significant issues such as land claims, treaties, and hunting and fishing rights. Leroy has received the prestigious appointment of the Officer of the Order of Canada, which is one of Canada's highest awards, presented to people who, quote, service shapes our society, whose innovations ignite our imagination, and whose compassion unites our communities. I now present to you Leroy Littlebear.
Okay. So I would thank Nancy for her introduction and so on, and I would welcome, all the attendees and so on, and tell them that I'm going to be presenting and talking about Native science, albeit I'm not going to be talking about specific things with regard to Native science. I want them to understand what we're going to be talking about are the foundational basis upon which science is based, both Western and
She's getting
Native
a little wary because
science.
I'm making noises in here with my door shut, and she wasn't super 100% keen.
Yeah. So I want to make
No, she hasn't.
I want to make sure that the audience understands that. Okay? And so this is where I say that most of us simply get up every morning and we do things, but we never question what, the basis of what we do, what it's based on. Every once in a while, something comes along that might shake us up and so on. And one of these is what I've been referring to as a midlife crisis. And what does a person do when they go through a midlife crisis? Well, they ask themselves, fundamental questions such as, who am I? What is it all about? What is life? What's the purpose of life and all that? So those are the kind of questions that people ask themselves. And so it's a good idea to go through this exercise of a midlife crisis periodically. But today, most elementary forms of life manifesting itself in a molecular form is causing global disorder. It presents a first-hand look at how fragile our so-called normal system really is. But I'm not wanting to talk about COVID-19. What I do want to talk to you about is for us to take the opportunity COVID-19 presents to us to stop and reflect. What are the metaphysics of our sciences? Where are those metaphysics taking us? Do we ever stop and think about that? What do I mean by metaphysics? Well, metaphysics are those foundational bases of our thinking processes. They are the criteria we use on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis and are so embodied in us that they go unquestioned, unstated, and taken for granted, but form the basis of our beliefs, what we do, and how we relate. The metaphysics of our modern Western world are based on a stagnant world. And remember, I'm talking about when I'm looking at these Western metaphysics, I'm an outsider. I'm a Blackfoot Indian, and I'm looking at them from a Blackfoot perspective. So the metaphysics of the modern Western world are based on a stagnant world. Remember Einstein? God does not play dice with the universe. Everything is about matter. Everything is inanimate, except for sentient beings like you and me. We look at things in isolation. We are future-oriented. In other words, been there, done, did it. Let's move on. All of the above is captured in the language we speak, like English, an noun-based language. These metaphysics give birth to social values such as bigger, newer, faster, higher, more, and so on. These in turn are based on the thinking of the Enlightenment era or Age of Reason. In other words, they've been around for about 600-700 years. Now, paradigms and metaphysics, if you stop and think about them, are the foundational basis of a society's way of thinking, beliefs, behavior, customs, and values. A quantum physicist, Steven Weinberg, talking about objectivity, and that's what scientists are always aiming for, says objectivity should be something that doesn't refer in any specific way to human beings. It should be something from which everything else, including anything you can say systematically about chemistry or biology or human affairs, can be derived. It shouldn't have human beings at the beginning in the laws of nature. And yet, I don't see any way of formulating quantum mechanics without an interpretive postulate that refers to what happens when people choose to measure one thing or another. That's what a Nobel Prize scientist says. Steven Weinberg. In other words, your paradigms or metaphysics are your interpretive template. That interpretive template becomes the foundation of your science and science methodology. Blackfoot science, for instance, has a different interpretive template and therefore a very different approach to science. And we can say that for Navajo. We can say that for Anishinaabe people, and so on. Now, if we stop and think, there's been attempts to try and rethink that. The Age of Reason, for instance, came into existence during the 16th century in Europe. It was a paradigmatic ideological and philosophical movement. It is about rationalism, a belief that you can come to know or arrive at truth strictly through reason as opposed to faith, reliance on the past, intuition, and metaphysics of everything we're talking about. It gave rise to deism. In other words, we can come to know everything through our gift of reason from God. In other words, the church jumped on the bandwagon. God made an orderly universe, and it is good and beautiful. God does not play dice. Remember Einstein. See, the Age of Reason, it seems, was a counter movement to the old establishment of the divine rule of kings and reliance on tradition. It attempted to subject anything and everything to rationalism. It did away with the subjective and dealt with only the objective, if there is such a thing. It did away with emotions and feelings. For instance, women were too emotional to be scientists and leaders. And see, we're still being haunted by those feelings and those beliefs. And consequently, hey, that's why we're still having women's movements today. Separation of church and state came into existence as a result of those beliefs that came out of the Age of Reason. Mysticism, miracles, ghosts, and the like were frowned upon. Get this, measurement and hence the role of mathematics became the foundation of the scientific method. Experimentation and pure reason can bring about knowledge, it was thought. For instance, in quantum physics, the Higgs particle, the scientists say, hey, through our reasoning, in other words, through our formula, the Higgs particle should occupy this space and its weight should be this. In other words, everything in our Western approach is propositional. There is no room for anything that cannot be measured, nor is there room for subjectivity. Scholars such as Ian McGilchrist suggest that we have become largely left-brain thinkers. Our thinking is about control and manipulation. abstraction, anonymity, organizability, predictability, and of course, financial balance sheets. In the process, justice gets interpreted simply as equality. The left brain does not understand things, but simply processes them. In other words, we can think about them and talk about them, but we really don't understand them. The left brain prefers the explicit, not knowing that making things explicit is like explaining a joke. But you see the point, see? Our approach to knowledge is largely declaratory and propositional and not experiential. You see the point? Of course, there are benefits of our left brain metaphysics. We are not denying those benefits and advances brought about by our present left brain metaphysics. But most of that is materiality. Is our present metaphysics improving and advancing our species? Are we happier? You know, there are scientists that are already talking about the new species. Coming back to McGilchrist was telling me about a teacher who was having to teach students how to read facial expressions. When you think about that, that's a sad statement. Are we becoming increasingly robotized? Is that what we want to turn out of our universities, you know, educational institutions? Von Goethe's science in the late 1700s and early 1800s did challenge the principles of the Age of Reason. One can say he was a forerunner of quantum physics. He had a spiritual approach to science. For him, the observed and the observer interacted. Goethe's science was about wholeness, integration of other fields like art, and notions of quality. Then in the early 1900s, quantum physics came on the scene. It is about uncertainty, particle-wave duality, non-locality, constant motion, probability, spirituality, as Jeremy Hayward would say. The reason, when we stop and think about it, in the Americas was in full bloom at the time of colonization of North American Indians. Because native science was about wholeness, just like quantum physics. Because it was about spirituality, waves as opposed to particles, everything being about relationships, and everything being animate, it was totally discounted by the rationalists. Because it was not about measurement and mathematics, it was nothing but mythology. It was not taken seriously. But let's take another look. In these following pictures, I'm just throwing in pictures from out of space from the Hubble Space Telescope. The metaphysics of Native people, and especially from Blackfoot people, it's about constant flux. It's about energy waves. And those energy waves are the spirit that we talk about all the time. Everything is animate. Everything is imbued with spirit. It's about all my relation. In other words, everything is interrelated. Everything is about renewal. Everything is related, and that relationships have to always be renewed. It's about space, it's about place. So in the Blackfoot mind, it's about space referencing. That's why land is very, very important to Native people. In the same way that time is a very important reference in the Western mind, land is a very important reference in the Native mind. Language is process-oriented as opposed to being noun-oriented. A very different mindset is brought about by Native languages. Here, I'm just throwing in these notions. In the Western mind, there's a belief that there is an underlying order, and that if there is chaos, it's humans that are bringing about chaos, but that there is an underlying order. Remember Einstein, God does not play dice with the universe. Here, it would be good to imagine a box. And inside the box is the universe. It's God's creation. And all the scientific work, all the scientific attempts, discoveries are attempts to penetrate that box. See? Whereas in the Native world, it's order over chaos. It's the flux. It's the flux. And we're always surfing the flux. See? So that's the reason why you cannot separate culture from science. The culture is the science. You have to really stop and think about that. Here, I'm not going to spend much time, but I just thought I'd throw in a number of things to compare quantum physics and their similarities and maybe a little bit of differences with native science and so on. I'd like to move on, but I thought I'd throw some of this in there for, interesting discussions. I'd rather ask at this point, where is the Western metaphysics taking us? We as Homo sapiens, are we better off as a result of those metaphysics? Is it really advancing the reason for our existence? If we ever stop and think about it, is our current metaphysics just another passing phase? In other words, Are we similar to the dinosaurs? We're just a passing phase? Maybe there are other metaphysics that we should take a good look at. Western science is largely aimed at exploration. I like to think of it as little kids that go out and try to discover things and so on, and etc. When they're playing and so forth, they like to go out and discover things. Native science is aimed at sustainability. In other words, hey, what is it that keeps us alive? What is it that keeps humanity continuing to exist, continuing to survive? It's about sustainability. We exist in a very narrow gap of ideal conditions. Stop and think about COVID-19. We need to maintain those conditions if we are going to be around as long as the fish has existed. The fish existed long before the dinosaurs. It's still around. The dinosaurs are gone. But have we ever asked the fish what his secret is? We should think like the fish does. Western science is largely based on measurements. As said earlier, anything that cannot be measured is not scientific. Blackfoot science is largely based on relations. It is all about relations. You can say, if it is not about relations, it is not about science. I have used Blackfoot metaphysics to compare to Western metaphysics. I blame our schools, that is our universities and educational institutions, for the products they turn out as students. Our universities and colleges are the present gatekeepers of knowledge, just like the church and the monarchs used to be. But could it be that our gatekeeping methodology is out of date? Could it be that our left brain metaphysics is increasingly leading us down a pathway of short-term gratification through materialism? Let's stop and reflect. Blackfoot metaphysics is waiting in the wings. Reconciliation with the land goes a long ways towards reconciliation with First Nations and their science. We should talk to our Native neighbors. The plains of North America, if you stop and think about it, are the most environmentally interfered with as far as ecosystems go. Why? Because of agriculture. We're very proud of our agriculture. Well, if there had been a little bit more relational approach, there may have been a whole lot less in an environmental and ecological damage. There may be a few more buffalo. A good environmentalist. You couldn't find a better environmentalist than the buffalo. COVID-19 is giving us an opportunity to reflect about the normal. Because the normal is the problem. That normal is based on metaphysics we never question. We just take for granted that that is the way it is. When in reality, they are just interpretive templates. In other words, we talk about science, scientific truths. There is no scientific truths. Scientific truths may lead us closer to puncturing that box that we refer to. But I'm not sure we'd ever get to puncture that box. Western science is all about measurement. Native science is about relationships. Our challenge is to reconcile those two fundamental approaches to science so that we can open new doors. That's the message I want to bring across to you. Let's stop and reflect on the metaphysical basis of our science. Thank you.
Okay, Leroy, I thank you so much for your wonderful words. And I think that, you know, the trickster was definitely in there. And for Navajo, we call it coyote or mai. For Cherokee, we call it a rabbit. And up here in the Northwest, we call it a raven. I'm not sure what your trickster is in Blackfoot, and maybe that can be a question. But you know, there are always lessons in what we learned from the trickster, and I think one of them was not to see the PowerPoint and then to close your eyes and just truly listen deeply to what you were saying. I think in that sense, the trickster gave us a gift to really concentrate on your beautiful use of words and the way you articulated your thoughts. And it was slow, it was powerful. It was just absolutely perfect. So I think, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the coyote probably did us some kind of a favor. Continuing on, we also want to thank the audience for your interest and attendance, and I also want to add in patience today. We will have on the IEI website the entire PowerPoint, all the slides that Leroy had. We'll have his voice without any interruption, and you'll be able to go back to that a day or two after this conference is over. That takes a little technology to do too. I also want to thank our tech people for being so great at going back and forth and making things work. And those people are Chris Tarrant from Tarrant Solutions and Art Ferraro from BLM and Jeff Cooper for standing by and helping us. There was a lot of chatting that went on back and forth behind the screens, and they were always there to make something go smoother. So let's go to the questions in the time we have left. And Leroy, you said you had two in particular that you thought you'd like to answer. So let's go back to Leroy and see if this works where you can see his face as he answers them. I'm not sure that will happen, but let's try it.
Okay. One of the questions, and these are more or less kind of general questions that people always ask in these kind of presentations, and that is, one of them is, how would you suggest that agencies, that is government agencies, educational agencies, and so on, begin or continue to build authentic relationships with local tribal communities? Okay, well, we were just saying that in the native world, everything is about relationships, okay? Well, hey, come out and visit us. You know, so many non-native people, are, they think this is still the Wild West. And come out and visit. Some of them are scared. I don't know how many people I run into saying, I'm scared to, can I come to a reservation and so forth, etc. Hey, come out and visit. Come and make friends with us, or invite us over and let's be friends. Let's have exchanges. That's how we get to know each other and so forth. See, in a work world, one of the things and one of my principles is never be scared to have people complain. In other words, your employees, never be scared to have employees complain, because that's how you know what people want, see, and what they're looking for, see. And so in a community, hey, if people complain, if people talk, that's how you know what people are looking for. So let's have the exchanges and so on. And so it goes with the native communities. One of the questions for our native audience that are listening in today is, how would you suggest that the local tribal communities move towards sharing their narrative with parks, museums, and universities? Well, the same thing. We have lots of knowledge. As I keep saying, our knowledge is waiting in the wings. It's not being used. It's not being utilized. It's waiting in the wings. Well, if we do have knowledge to share, hey, let's go out and share it. Let's go out and share it rather than just holding on to it and so on. Let's go out and share it. However, which is the next question, and that is, what about intellectual property? How do we as Indigenous people protect our intellectual property? Well, that's a very, very important part. And that is, let me use as an example the typical social scientist, anthropologist that comes out to the native community. They come out to the native community and so on, get all the information they want and so forth, get their PhDs, etc., and you never hear from them anymore. And the knowledge that they get, they've never benefits the native community or their informants. I was just reading about the lady, that was taken on a picture as a migrant mother. That's a famous icon mother that was never identified till 1978. And she was taken with her kids and so on. And she was selling her tires back in the Depression era and to feed her kids and so on. But there was no name to it, to her, and so on. And it wasn't until 1978 that they identified her. And she was saying, I never got a penny out of those pictures. And here in Sotheby's in New York, some of the prints that were of her were selling for $240,000, of her. And she never got a penny out of it. Well, those are the kind of things that Native people always experience too. Informants, people come in and they give all the information, etc. We never get any. So intellectual property, in other words, they consider it just myth, and there's no protection. Whereas there's copyrights, there's corporate secrets and things like that are, to protect people and so on. But for Indigenous knowledge, there's no protection. So that's something important that the Native community and the non-Native community have to work on. So that, that's one of the reasons why Native people maybe are not as willing to share their information and so on, okay? It says over here, you were one of the first directors of Harvard University's Native American program. Could you please share your vision for the relevance of Indigenous studies in schools and academia? Well, the thing is, as I was talking about Indigenous, as I was talking about this whole notion about the church and the universities, and the divine rule of kings, I should say. Well, today, the universities are kind of the gatekeepers of knowledge, okay? Well, I kind of blame our universities for what they turn out, In other words, the kind of students they turn out. And the kind of students they turn out are the consumatory students. They are students who are going to be consuming products. The whole system is what one economist, Paul Hawken, put as the throughput system. And the throughput system consists of, we go get the raw product, we process it into a product, we consume the product, and then we throw it away. See, that's basically the system we go through. See, well, I think we got to really rethink that whole thing, that whole economic system over again, And I think COVID-19 and staying at home gives us an opportunity to rethink it over, So I blame our universities for not coming up with some new way of thinking and the type of students they put out. Be more creative, when it comes to turning out students and so on, creating a new world, a new thought process, students with much more critical minds and so on, rather than just turning out students that are going to be in the consumption world, so on, okay? And I would like to put a pitch in for the kind of work that we've been putting in, me and my wife and a number of other people, and that is, for the past few years, and I've mentioned it when I was talking about agriculture and my number one environmentalist, the buffalo. for the past few years, we've been working on the buffalo. And our elders have said, you know, that buffalo is out there. We don't see it on an everyday basis. Our kids hear the songs, they see the ceremonies and may even participate in those ceremonies, but they don't see that buffalo on an everyday basis, so they don't make connections to it. We need that buffalo come back. And so the land will become healthy again. Our children will become healthy again if that buffalo came back. And so when I saw that picture, we started working on the buffalo restoration. And we've been working on that buffalo restoration for the past 10, 12 years now. And it has resulted in a buffalo treaty on both sides of the American-Canadian border. And there's more and more First Nations signing on to that buffalo treaty. And in fact, now people on the coast and a little bit inland are starting to say, hey, we can use that buffalo treaty as a template to sign a treaty on fisheries, you know, about salmon and so forth. We can use that as a template. Well, that's something we're trying to bring back, not just for social and cultural purposes, but to restore the land environmentally, you know, to restore and maybe slow down the climate change process that's taken place. That buffalo is very, very important to those changes that are occurring. So that's what we've been working on for the past few years. And it's very, very exciting work, you know. So anybody that wants to jump on and help with that, hey, please do so. Just let us know. We need all the help we can get. Thank you.
Thank you, Leroy, and thanks for answering all of these questions so eloquently. I can't tell you how grateful we are to have had you on as our first speaker in this series. It does so much to set the tone and the quality of what we're intending to share with this series, which we hope will go on for 2 years. It's been an honor to host you today. And for all of you who
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. For all of you that were patient and came in, my partners and I are so grateful for your investment of time, and we hope we've piqued your interest for the next 3 speakers in this series. We're sending out an email to you right after the Zoom ends to survey your thoughts, which would really be helpful for us to have some feedback from you. And this is a time where if you had written questions into the Q&A part of the Zoom, this might be a good time to repeat them so that we have them in kind of a data bank to make sure our continued series is going to get you what you want and need of knowledge base to continue your work. We also want you to save the date for our next speaker, who will be talking on June 18th. Kaiu Kimura is our next speaker. Kaiu is the director of the Imaloa Astronomy Center in Hilo, Hawaii. She's born on the slopes of Mauna Kea, and she's a native Hawaiian. She is the director of a world-renowned science center, which was founded on the premise that Western science and native ways of knowing can collaborate, can coexist. And it's a wonderful a role model for any of you that are wondering how this can happen. She will be speaking to us at noon on the 18th. We'd love to have you return, and we will address some of our technology issues before that. So thanks for your interest. Thank all of you. We'll say goodbye for now, and we've enjoyed very much presenting Leroy to you. These are relationships we hope will continue far into the future. So goodbye.